Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
This is Initiated Survivor, where we share survivors' voices and our stories of recovery and reclaiming our power. I'm Kelsey Harper. I'm a clinical psychologist and a survivor, and I like to share helpful tips and skills about recovery from trauma. As a community of survivors, we have tremendous power to change the world, so thank you so much for being here. Here we discuss stories and information that is relevant to survivors of gender-based violence and sexual violence. These topics may be triggering and are for adult ears only, so please be mindful of your needs throughout. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initiated Survivor. Today I wanted to talk about group therapy, support groups, the power of groups, like what usefulness can groups have for us as survivors, for people recovering from trauma, anyone coming together. So something I talk about often on here is the value of community and how important it is to connect to community, to connect with personal values around community, to engage actively and build relationships in community. However, for many of us, the systems in place have isolated us away from each other and broken down natural community development. As survivors living in rape culture, misogynistic society, we can be alienated by the victim-blaming nature of this culture and our trauma symptoms with isolation, social isolation, withdrawal, often due to heightened fear and anxiety, dissociation, depressed mood, and difficulty engaging in really any activities at all, make it really hard to connect with other people and to find community. During many years of my early recovery, I was very isolated. I stayed at home. I worked a lot to distract myself and to stay busy. I also think that can be a bit of an activation of the fight response, like being able to mobilize and take action on something that seems to be supporting your survival, and work is one of those things. But I distracted myself and I was keeping really busy. I only went to work and went home to really crash before just going back to work. And oftentimes what I was doing at home were things that were just to kind of numb or to dissociate, to kind of get through the end of the day and relax and then try to go to work the next day. Hardly went anywhere. And even to the point of having my groceries delivered, my laundry picked up, leaving Amazon returns never returned, because just leaving home felt like so much of a burden, like going and running errands, going to the post office, like my anxiety would get really, really activated. And I would just feel this kind of freeze response of like, I just don't want to go anywhere, that it is worth my while to just take the loss around the Amazon purchase and stay home rather than take it in to have it returned. I was often feeling very activated and afraid, feeling intense hypervigilance when I would go out. I would always be scanning the scene to identify, any possible threats or risks, to notice any sounds that were going on. I often would, like, my eyes would fly to the door, or when I would see people walking around, I would constantly be looking at that. It was all really, really exhausting. I also felt like my senses and my sensory intake was really, really heightened, that sounds were really too loud, light was too bright. I often just felt like I really needed to kind of cave in on myself. And I would have these waves upon waves of fear about running into the person who attacked me. I would spend a lot of time while I'm out trying to manage those thoughts, like trying to reason with myself, trying to remind myself that I'm safe and okay, trying to limit some of my time out just so that I know that it's unlikely that I'll run into this person, all of that kind of thing. And one of the most effective ways to manage all of these symptoms and these feelings was just to simply go nowhere, to not leave, to, go to work, go home, go to work, go home. And I often refer to this, like when I think about it for myself, think about this time in my life as my cave years. My home was my cave, and my cave was actually an incredibly comforting place. Like, I didn't feel like I was holed up and caged in. I actually felt like I was finally at ease when I would be at home. It would feel like a big exhale. My space was very healing and very, very supportive, or it felt like it was. It was very comforting, even though it was just me and my animals living there. But, it was a very comforting, safe place. It was just also really, really hard to leave because everything outside of it felt really threatening and really dangerous, or at the very least just felt really uncomfortable. And I was at a place where, like, any amount of discomfort was just a little bit too much because my baseline discomfort was already really high. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but likely what I was experiencing was some degree of agoraphobia, which for me was this intense fear of becoming overwhelmed by triggers. This intense fear of even just having to experience triggers, of feeling that hypervigilance, feeling that anxiety, having memories and intrusive thoughts come in, feeling like I'm constantly looking around, having to listen to all the sounds. If I knew it was going to be like a crowded time at the grocery store, I certainly wouldn't want to go. I definitely avoided crowded restaurants and usually just ordered takeout if I wanted some restaurant food. And so being really afraid of being overwhelmed and flooded with anxiety and staying home to control the environment, that's actually something we think of as agoraphobia. There are some ways that I still struggle with this at times, like where it does take a little bit for me to kind of psych myself up or hype myself into leaving my home or going outside and trying something new, especially in unknown environments. But I've definitely been practicing a lot of exposure with going out and doing things like exposure-based type of activities, or things like facing your fears, going out into the crowded spaces, but in a safe, effective way, using skills. I wear earplugs, for example, and that helps with some of the sound sensitivity, wear hats or sunglasses to help with some of the light sensitivity. But working on addressing this in therapy, I've been able to feel much more grounded when I'm going out, and have been able to start to practice connecting with others. And now my anxiety symptoms are much more tolerable when I go out. And what I love about that is that it's giving me this opportunity to start to build relationships and see what communities are available to me. I'm also an introvert, and so being social in general and things like small talk really are not my jam. I would much rather do anything else except small talk. But I've learned a lot about how to be mindful and compassionate to my social battery, because it definitely gets worn out with the more and more that I socialize, especially if it's new communities, new people. And I've been much more open to taking space and restoring my energy. And that's something for many introverts can be really valuable, is if we deliberately take time in a compassionate, non-judgmental way to allow ourselves rest and restoration, to be by ourselves, to have some solitude, to work on our creative projects, all of that kind of stuff, it actually can help support us. Then with putting ourselves out there and being social and connecting with new people and dealing with that drain on the social battery that's going to have. That kind of taking space and solitude and peacefulness and connecting with some solitary activities can also be incredibly powerful with helping for some of those trauma symptoms. It definitely can help create this grounded space. It kind of resources us up with a lot of peace and calm, a sense of centeredness, more energy, so that we have more space emotionally and energetically that we can spend on something that is a little more challenging and difficult. One of the main things that ultimately helped me with getting out of my cave were around connecting to small, accessible communities through groups. Some of this was just very simple stuff like going to restorative yoga classes. I could talk for hours about restorative yoga and the power of that. And maybe I will at some point, or going to community art classes where the social interaction was really limited. And it was just about being in the same room with people doing the same thing. I felt like that was a really nice step because it helped me practice the activity of getting ready for something, leaving the house, driving to wherever it was, going and entering the room, being around humans, and then leaving. Another thing that was incredibly helpful for me around getting out of my cave was the heroic powers of Neville, my therapy floof. He is my dog. You've probably seen him in some photos. He's not an official emotional support animal or ESA, but he definitely is quite emotionally supportive of me, and I love him dearly. And in a future episode, I will talk about ESAs, emotional support animals, how they can support survivors and people who've experienced trauma, and how he helped me with my trauma recovery just simply by being who he is. It's very powerful to have animals that we take care of and can also care for us. So coming back anyways, this started with taking restorative yoga classes, specifically where I was. I found a restorative yoga class that had really positive reviews, and I had never really done much restorative yoga before. Restorative yoga is a type of yoga where the focus is on how to rest and how to make space for rest in a very mindful, intentional way, that you're not doing deep stretches, you're not holding poses that are going to put a strain on your muscles, that in fact, that the work is actually about resisting that urge to go into work. And this can be actually a wonderful, wonderful tool for teaching us how to let go of toxic productivity and be able to learn about rest as a personal value. If that's something that you struggle with, I certainly did and still do. But I always was lining up at the beginning of class, like right outside the front door, usually within the first 3 people, because I was like, this is my thing. I have to do it. It was Sunday nights, which I always thought was a little weird, like why you would, rest and get restoration right before starting a week. But it was nice. It worked really, really well. I would immediately run in, roll out my mat, like right in the front, get all of my bolsters and my blocks. And I was just like lying down, ready, waiting for everybody to get in, ready to rest and restore. And I started to notice that having this routine of going out and going to this community, I talked to 0 people there. I never even talked to the instructor. I really just did the class, felt amazing, left, came back the next week and did that over and over. But I started to feel more safe and comfortable with leaving my home, with engaging in activities and being around people, and then started to look for more opportunities to connect in with my community around me. Right as I started doing that, when I started feeling that sense of like, I think I'm actually ready to go out and do stuff and be with people, the pandemic started and we all sheltered in place. Sheltering at home for me felt really easy, very relieving. It was something I'd been doing at years for this point and now could, just kick that stone down the street of that challenge that I was trying to get out of my house a little bit more. And I knew that there was not going to be this pressure to be going out and about because a lot of the people in the world were not going out and about either. But one of the things that was actually particularly helpful during the pandemic was there was this dramatic increase in accessible virtual groups, things like virtual ceremonies and witchy rituals, virtual writing classes that I took that I loved, even virtual yoga, virtual dance classes. I mean, people were doing everything virtual. It was really wonderful because it made it very accessible to everyone to be able to participate and connect. And what also was really lovely about that is that it often offered different degrees of intensity around interaction. Like if it was a very small group, then I might be interacting a lot more with people. If it was a really large group, I might just be attending. But even before this, before going into all of the virtual classes, I had tried, like I said, restorative yoga. I had tried some writing classes at the local extension school, and it was just an intense amount of effort to really get myself to go. So having these virtual groups was incredibly helpful. And it was kind of like the middle path that I didn't know that I really needed that helped me with being able to experiment with connecting with communities and putting myself out there in a way that also still helped my body feel safe and grounded because my body was at home. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to announce this exciting offering. I'm going to be creating and launching a trauma skills group virtually in 2024. I'm really excited about this. As you know, in the show, I've talked about different skills that can help us with recovering from crisis, with calming down panic attacks, with communicating to people, with staying active and engaged in our values, how to build relationships. And now I'm bringing those skills directly to you in this group format. So it's nice and accessible and you get some hands-on experience practicing these skills in real time. This is going to be a 12-week group, 12 one-hour sessions where we meet virtually in a small group. And I'm going to be training you on the different skills that you use, how they can be applied, and giving you things to practice as well as materials to reference about all of these different skills. Many participants in the past have told me that they really felt they benefited from learning more about trauma, how trauma works in the body, as well as building confidence in themselves and learning how to connect more to their values and what they feel is important in life. So here's an opportunity for us to do this more. Recently, I registered to be able to provide virtual therapy to 40 states in the United States. So this group is going to be accessible all across the United States, which I'm very excited about. I am going to be capping the size of the group to keep it small so that we can be a close community of trauma survivors and build effective relationships in there and so that people feel safe and secure. If you do sign up later, I'll have a wait list for the next time that I'm running the group. Now, to start the group, signups are going to start January 1st, and from January 1st to January 31st is early bird signups where the whole session, the whole 12-week session is going to cost $1,080. And that turns out to be about $90 per session. After that, starting February 1st, it's going to go up to its full price of $1,200 for all of the sessions. And so it would definitely benefit you to sign up early as soon as possible. If you would like to get more information about this, you can go to my website at www.drkelseyharper.com, drkelseyharper.com/group, or you can join my mailing list where you will get the link to enroll as soon as it opens up and can sign up right there. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to get started with you all. So through attending all of these virtual things, I felt like I was very safe in my cave. Like my home was my space. I was able to get comfortable in there. I had all my animals around me. I could have a weighted blanket. I would light candles. I would get everything set and in the right space and could experience being seen and being heard by other people and interacting with them, and also having people respond to me in a way that also kept my senses really regulated. And this was some exposure work as well. It exposed me to see that I can be out in the world and can be interacting with people and not get flooded, that I can also do things that are very personally vulnerable, like share some personal writing, engage in sacred ceremonies with people, talk about what comes up during meditation, stuff like that, and not get flooded and actually be received and connected. Ultimately, this was kind of like dipping my toe back in the water of building relationships, and it became a very powerful healer for me. So some of the things that I did, I attended writing workshop groups, and I still do. I absolutely love these. I feel like there's something particularly vulnerable about sharing creative work with people and creative space and being in that mindset. I would attend like witchy moon ceremonies, energy healing circles, professional consultation teams for work, even just like virtual happy hours or social hours with friends and family, and found that I was able to build much more social connection through doing those things than I had before, and started to build more comfort with this. So this can also seem awfully simplistic of like just attend some fun virtual workshops and you'll be fine. It was also a way that I was acting in things that were important to me, experimenting with meaningful activities, understanding and learning more about my personal values. And those are all things that actually help us with connecting to communities in a larger sense, which I'll get to in a moment. But this was a way that I was acting on those things that were important to me around spirituality, connection to the earth and earth cycles, creativity, family, where previously the only thing I was doing was just like going to work and surviving at home, and then going to work and surviving at home. And my life felt very much like Groundhog's Day. It was the same thing every single day. My mind really couldn't project out to the future very much, which is a very common symptom for people with trauma. Is just because we're in that fight or flight, that survival mode, our mind is not thinking about the future. Our mind is thinking about the immediate surroundings and what do we need in order to survive it or stay safe. But that also means then like every single day starts to feel exactly the same. And I know for me, I was noticing a lot that my life was lacking a sense of meaning, that there wasn't just this loss around the loss of safety and bodily harm that was done and the trauma that occurred, but also this loss of sense of meaning and purpose in life, because I had to focus and was focusing so much on survival, that now days, weeks, months, years were being spent simply on just being totally focused on getting through each moment and not at all focused on how to build a beautiful, meaningful life. Or in DBT, we call it a life worth living. And so by engaging in some of these safe one-off groups here and there, yoga classes, writing workshops, that kind of thing, I was starting to dabble in some of those things that previously were fun or previously were interesting to me, and start to see if it engaged something for me, if it activated some sort of interest or passion, if it started to even just bring up curiosity, and start to see how that might funnel me towards certain values and then connect to communities with those values. So this brings me back to groups and group therapy. Group therapy is ultimately based on the idea that as humans, as social creatures, the social animals that we are, that group therapy accesses our inherent community building and connecting psychological structures to facilitate healing, change, growth, and insight development. In many ways, this is why individual therapy works. that we're using a relationship between a therapist and client as a vehicle to facilitate psychological, emotional healing and well-being. And these types of relationships, as humans, we are built to respond to that. We are built to make shifts and changes, and we're built to change in response to relationships. And that's why therapy really works. And we can do the same with groups. We practice and build skills for connecting with others, how to resolve conflicts, as well as accepting conflict and differences with others, that we don't have to agree perfectly. We don't have to have the same walks of life to be able to connect or at least coexist. We can begin to feel more masterful in building those relationships, but we also get to experience being heard and being seen and validated and respected. We get to experience repairs, like when there's ruptures in relationships and how to repair them. All of this is really, really valuable for survivors of any violence and any trauma, especially anyone who has complex trauma or CPTSD. This experience of being validated, heard, and seen and respected can be very, very new and a very powerful healing experience to have. And group is a way that we start to feel and experience that very powerful healing mechanism that happens as being a part of a small community. So in this already powerful context, we can connect with specific topics we're wanting to learn more about. We can understand more about ourselves. We can build skills. We can connect with people who have shared interests, all of that kind of stuff. We have two different types of groups that people usually engage in. One is like a process group, and this is what we think of as traditional talk therapy, where we are processing through emotions, experiences, insights, with the idea that we are talking about these issues at hand and people are responding in the group. And we're building insight together, and we're changing and shifting in response to the dialogue that occurs in the group. In skills groups, and this is kind of like a DBT skills group, sometimes CBT groups, the group comes together to learn a specific skill set and accesses the wisdom and experience of the whole group of people, of all the individuals, to better understand how to apply these skills and also continue to build motivation to continue implementing these skills, implementing change in our lives. It's so much easier and a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to work towards achieving goals with a group of people who are cheering us on and we're cheering them on than it is to do it in isolation where nobody knows what's happening. So groups can also be a great add-on to individual therapy. It's a way to connect with others around specific mental health topics that matter to you, as well as connect with other people who have shared the same goals, and add additional work to deepen the personal therapy and accelerate progress that we do in personal therapy. Groups are also a great way to access mental health care that might otherwise be cost prohibitive. Groups often cost less per session than individual therapy. It can also be time limited. For example, you might only go for 8 weeks or 12 weeks and you just kind of address one specific issue. You learn a specific skill set. So you get a chance to really focus on that. And that also can make it much more affordable as well. Groups can be a great way to access some popular evidence-based practices like DBT or dialectical behavior therapy, as those can often be quite expensive to do individually in individual therapy. I know for me, I've experienced really powerful healing and change in myself when I've been a part of groups and group therapy. I've also witnessed this as a therapist of groups that I've facilitated, and really highly recommend considering group resources. There's definitely a lot of networks that you can connect with that will list the different groups that are in any kind of area you're in, by city, by county, that kind of thing. You can find them on Psychology Today as well to find some groups near you. There's also a lot of groups that are now virtually offered and may be accessible to a lot of different spaces. For example, this year, I'm starting 2 new groups for folks wanting to build skills together in a safe and validating community. I'm opening a DBT skills training group for LGBTQ people, as well as a trauma recovery skills group for survivors of trauma. Both of them are 12 weeks of specific skill building in small groups where folks can connect to other like-minded folks and learn to apply some very powerful skills in their lives right now, set some goals that they're wanting to achieve with regards to building skills around relationships, stress management, emotion regulation, reducing dissociation, being more centered and present, being able to understand how trauma impacted them and start to support themselves with their trauma recovery work. These are going to start in April, but enrollment is open now. You can sign up and get more information at my website. There are limited spaces. I like to keep groups very small so people can have a lot of safety and space to share. As well as in those small groups, we can create really close, lasting relationships and connections that can continue outside of the group past the 12 weeks that we're in group together. They start in April, like I said, and if you don't make it to these, I'll also be offering another cohort in the fall. So you can also keep your eyes peeled for that or sign up for my mailing list to get more information about that. Groups and workshops, circles are all lovely, wonderful ways to get started and get our foot in the door of connecting with community. My groups are all going to be virtual, and because I am licensed in California and Washington, and I'm also registered with SidePack, my groups are available to people who live in 40 states. So if you want to, you can go onto my website and see what states those are and see if you might be able to join. Groups can really help us take a small step outside of our cave into the light that feels much more manageable and safe. These groups, especially because they're virtual, allow us to practice connecting with other people in the safety of our home, as well as have our skills with us ready right in those moments for when we might be feeling activated around those relationships. Groups help us practice those social skills in safe and validating spaces, skills that we maybe haven't used in a long time because we haven't been socializing. I know for me, there was this sense of like, I have to practice talking to humans. I don't really know how to talk to humans outside of work, how to be open and vulnerable and share stuff about myself. Oftentimes this can be expressed as like, I don't have anything going on. I'm kind of boring. I don't have much in my life to talk about. And that's actually more that I don't know how to connect with people personally. And we can practice those skills in groups and group therapy. In a future episode, I will talk more about building community and relationships and the power that community has in trauma recovery, as well as connecting with community and how it has power in changing our world on a larger scale in a future episode as well. Thank you so much for being here today, and I will be back with some new information very soon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Sam Valentine and her team at Fast Forward Productions for editing, producing, publishing, and all-around podcast magic that makes this podcast possible. If you found something that resonated with you, please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. This simple but meaningful action really helps increase the visibility and accessibility of this podcast to survivors and allies that may be looking for some support and connection. I love connecting with listeners and allies, so please feel free to share this episode on your socials and go ahead and tag me in it at Initiated Survivor or at Kelsey J. Harper. A final but very important note. While I am a clinical psychologist, this episode and this podcast does not constitute professional mental health care or therapy, nor is it a replacement for professional therapy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The podcast host and the guests are not rendering professional advice and should not be considered to have developed a professional relationship. If you are looking for mental health care or professional help, please seek it out. We have some links in the show notes that may help you with that, or you can contact your insurance carrier directly for referrals.